Meena Seshu. The session is chaired by Professor Uma Chakravarti. As per the schedule, Dr. Jaya Velankar and Dr. Jaya Mehta were supposed to participate in this session as speakers, but since both of them are unwell, they are unable to participate. We now move on to who was supposed to be our second speaker, but we are inviting her to be the first one, Meena Seshu. I'm happy to welcome Meena Seshu, who is a dedicated activist for the gender rights. She has been a crusader for the cause of gender awareness and sensitivity. She has been working relentlessly for the sex workers' rights and has founded the NGO Sangram, through which she aims at empowering sex workers. She created Vaishya Anyay Mukti Parishad, VAMP, as a collective of people in sex work. She'll be discussing the issue of decriminalizing the sexual orientation and gender identity in South Asia. Meena, ma'am, please.
Hi, I need to share my screen.
Okay.
Good afternoon, and the earlier session was really interesting. Though translation and I are not at all friendly with each other, not being actually well versed in any of these languages, including English, I was finding it very fascinating, the discussion that was taking place. So thank you for that session. It was very interesting. To give you a small background about what I'm going to speak about is my experience actually working on the grassroots has been with sex workers and sex workers who are female, male, and transgender workers. And at the South Asia level, we have a network called Sex Workers and Allies South Asia, SWASA. And much of my talk today is actually dependent on the grassroots level work of SWASA in 4 countries in this region, which is Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and India. Megha, of course, said that I always speak about sex work, and this time I should speak about LGBTQIA+, and I agreed. And so I'm going to talk about lesbians, gay people, bisexuals, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, plus talking about the entire fluid, gender fluid populations that we work with. First, I'd like to look at criminalization and what it has meant to us. And people, especially who live on the other side of the dominant norms. We are people who occupy, we are outlawed, and we are persecuted by criminal laws. And much of this has been done to quell our own freedom of expression. Every time we've questioned the state or the law that has been so detrimental to our health and well-being, every time we have demanded accountability from the state when the police and the law enforcement has been so, not just harassment, they have violated all our rights. And of course, when there has been dissent of any kind of democratic expression of our rights. Mostly it has been done to control or deny us life and livelihood, any behavior that challenges the dominant norm, any kind of sexual preference. In fact, we had slogans that said, "Judge not, support sexual preference," which talked about bodily integrity, autonomy, self-ownership, self-determination over our own bodies. I mean, we are not even arguing about the general state. We are only arguing about our own bodies. And even in this situation, we have been denied, controlled, and quelled by the state which criminalizes our existence. And much of this discussion has been done in the space of public good. And now, of course, public good has in recent years become even the issue of national security, and which is determined by a very authoritarian state. So let's not forget that part of criminalization. We, of course, also face the problem of societal criminalization, right? I mean, so it's not only criminalization by the state. Constantly, our fight is against state and society. So under the guise of protection of individuals, families, so people like us who don't conform to the norm, we are considered people who are practicing a vice and therefore need to be pushed underground. So we have the model brigade, of course, and very much encouraged by the state. Remember, the model brigade cannot work on its own unless it has the full support of the state. They've been intolerant and they've campaigned viciously against any kind of deviance. And I'm specifically talking in this situation of trans men and lesbian women who have been hounded by society out of families, out of any kind of umbrella of safety. Let them be single mothers, let them be in pre or extramarital relationships, in multiple sex partnerships, of course, commercial sex, and any kind of erotic sexual performance, preference, the works. And all of this has come under illicit sexual conduct. And the punishment has been extreme. Some violence, abuse, even torture by the state, forced migration, you have to get out of your houses. There have been honor killings by various men in the families. And of course, in many, many situations, it has meant death. So let's look at South Asia. In South Asia, if you can look, I mean, I hope you can see the screen, the amount of reds that you see on this screen actually look at LGBTQIA plus rights in South Asia. And we're looking at Bangladesh, Bhutan, the Indian Ocean, the UK territory in the Indian Ocean, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. And if you look at same-sex sexual activity across the region, we have either it's been criminalized, like in Bangladesh, Maldives, and Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, or it has recently just been, I wouldn't even say fully legalized, but some kind of reading down of the colonial laws have happened. So we have in this region, you have the whole gamut. You have extreme criminalization and persecution by the state, and you have some parts that have been legal and some parts that are tolerated. So you have this whole gamut here. From the screen, you can see we are looking at same-sex unions, we're looking at same-sex marriages. One, I think, terrible part is this adoption by same-sex couples. This actually is a right that is denied same-sex couples, and it's extremely problematic across the region. There are some countries that have said yes to LGBTQI people being openly in the military. Local activists have really struggled and fought. The case being Sunil Pant in Nepal, for instance. People from the grassroots have fought with their governments to get some kind of anti-discrimination laws in place. And the interesting part, of course, is traditionally we've always had the transgender identity and the transgender expression in this region. Mostly the word hijra has been recognized and used. And of course, there are many cultural connotations to all of this. So some countries have accepted that change in gender is acceptable. And in fact, in Sri Lanka, where I work with sex workers from the transgender community, it is very interesting. On one hand, they can't even go out and, have a performative life. And on the other, you see that the government actually gives you opportunities to be able to change your gender in the local hospitals. So there is this full range that you would see in this on the rights of this community. Why do we challenge criminalization? Why is it that criminalization for us has become such an important part of our lives? Because it's not only the law and law enforcement, it is also society and families that have actually used criminalization to persecute and outlaw our communities. What does criminalization do? It prevents any reporting of violence, let it be economic violence, let it be physical violence, mental violence. Must remember, a large group of male sex workers, transgender sex workers, female sex workers. There's a lot of economic violence that happens because of the work that is involved. There is a lot of physical, mental. There are violations by law enforcers. Even just before 377 was read down in India, we saw a lot of violations by law enforcers who used it. Especially Sri Lanka has reported a lot about this. There was a study by UNDP and UNFPA where we were the technical advisors for that study, and it was done in this region. It was done in Nepal and Sri Lanka. And the violations by law enforcers are absolutely from torture to bribery to corruption, the entire range of violations. Of course, there is absolutely no proper health service access at all. Mostly people who come from these communities have issues with sexually transmitted infections, which they are not even examined for. So even doctors, healthcare providers do not believe that these are human beings who should be actually examined and then given medication for infections that they get while either during their work or during their practice of sexual lives. Of course, the exercise of rights as citizens is just doesn't exist. What does it do to these people? It crushes them. Stigma, discrimination, tremendous fear. They live in fear. Can you imagine an entire life that is lived in fear? Fear of not only just violence and violations, but fear of just existence, that your choice to live can get impacted by any random person. There are people who live in, who talked about it in Nepal and who talked about it even in India, in various studies that we have done, where not only do you have to run away from home, but anywhere you live, chances of you being outed there and therefore hounded by society and then, of course, law enforcement is very, very high. So you're looking at people who are the kind of mental stress that the LGBTQI community lives with because of this criminalization, and why we are constantly fighting for decriminalization. So what are the consequences? We have found that anybody who challenges the dominant norm are pushed into narrow boxes. They are not acceptable. We have colonial era laws, of course. So we have to deal with public decency, obscenity, morality, public health also very often. I remember right in the beginning with HIV, which is where I started my work at the grassroots, the kind of discussions on people who were in multiple sexual partnerships or any kind of sexual activity, multiple sexual activity, not only sex workers, gay men, transgender people, the kind of understanding that, they're a public health threat, and therefore they're vectors of spread of HIV and killing decent human beings, was the way it was those days articulated. The fact that much of this community was criminalized and looked at within that lens of criminalization, just helped law enforcers and society to harass this community. And nobody ever thought of ensuring safe environments to live to be able to look at LGBTQIA individuals as human beings. And I remember, "Are we not human?" was a huge, huge cry that the community had put out. All of this, of course, depends on the regime in power. So either you're tolerating the individuals, or you are overusing and misusing the existing laws. So you have both of this again in this region. What does it do to people? It prevents them from organizing. It prevents them from living safely, accessing safe living conditions, access to, say, health services. Access to justice is something that I think even we've forgotten, if that is even possible. And the ability to fight violations. It impacts dignity and it impacts self-worth. Decriminalization. When we were discussing decriminalization, I always feel we need to understand what we mean by decriminalization. Decriminalization is nothing but removal of all laws and statutes that are making you as an individual, because of the acts that you are undertaking, into criminals. We just want those acts to be removed such that these acts are no longer crimes or offenses. So you can only decriminalize if you're criminalized, remember. So much of living was in India before 377 was read down, was criminalized. And the problem with criminalization is that, which is what I talked about right in the beginning, about the state and non-state actors criminalizing, society criminalizing, is even though the state has decriminalized, for instance, in India, society continues to criminalize. And I want to use this language of criminalization for society. What happens with individuals? At least there's no force, coercion. They can live freedom from fear, from debt bondage and slavery-like practices, because most transgender people today are under some kind of debt bondage, and because of that debt bondage are having to live with slavery-like practice in these large communes, because they don't have any other source of either income or ability to live outside that space. Citizenship rights, of course, and the right to change your gender. I think it is important that decriminalization will bring some kind of legal protection from all discrimination and harassment. The way forward, I really am very impressed by the Yogyakarta principles on sexual orientation and gender identity that came up in 2007. And in 2017, this was done, of course, by human rights lawyers and activists and community members in Yogyakarta. And then in Geneva in 2017, a bunch of us again got together and we put together Yogyakarta Principles +10, where we looked at not only sexual orientation, gender identity, we looked at even gender expression and sexual characteristics. And I'd just like to, because I just feel that if the community gets language to articulate what they are demanding from the state, at least the dream of decriminalization will be, a reality. So Yogyakarta Principles on SOGI, this was on the application of international human rights law in relation to sexual orientation and gender identity. And this was not to get new legal standards. This was just restating the existing human rights framework and to ask questions of SOGI. What the principles did was they visibilized invisible violence. And they tried to draw attention to international human rights law such that it can respond to the continuing violations experienced by this community. And +10, 2017 saw this adoption of Yogyakarta +10, where 9 new principles were added. The original had 29 principles and about 104 new state obligations and additional recommendations. And what it did was it expanded the markers of discrimination from SOGI to SOGI-esque, which is including gender expression and sex characteristics. So the 29 principles have become a significant landmark, because don't forget that this has been used even in India when 377 was being read down. So we have how the Yogyakarta principles, how the community got together and developed these principles, which could actually be used in the court to argue for decriminalization. It has been cited by UN agencies, human rights organs, states, judiciary, and various national jurisdictions. And its importance lies in advancing a collective understanding of the relationship between violations and international human rights law. So if you look at principle 1 of the Yogyakarta principle, it says all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And human beings of all sexual orientations and gender identities are entitled to the full enjoyment of all human rights. I'm sure you can understand the language of the UDHR and how that has been adapted by the principle 1 of the Yogyakarta principle. And essentially, it is to draw on the fact that, which is part of the preamble of UDHR, which looks at how we needed the UDHR such that because there has been a disregard and contempt for human rights, which have resulted in barbarous acts, as we all know, of World War I. And don't forget, even then, though we looked at Nazi fascism, don't forget that homosexuals had to wear the pink triangle on their shirts to identify them in the concentration camps also. So they were definitely part of a group of people who were who barbarous acts were committed against them. So they struggle to establish these rights, first of all, to be accepted as human beings. I think that was the first struggle, which entitled to equal moral consideration. So the principle 1 of the Yogyakarta principle, it makes the important claim that all people, LGBTQIA plus people, are human beings first. They're entitled to all rights that human beings are entitled to under international human rights law. And this was the first articulation that came about in 2007. And this was a struggle. In 1992, sexual orientation as a construct was accepted. But for gender identity to be added to that, it took the Yogyakarta principles, which came in 2007. And then for us to include sexual characteristics, sex characteristics, and gender expression to this took another 10 years, which is 2017. So the point that I'm trying to make is that none of this would have been possible without activists struggling with their governments and struggling with the UN system to accept language that describes this community and the rights of this community. Sexual orientation and identity. Sexual orientation refers to each person's capacity for profound emotional, affectional, and sexual attraction to, and intimate and sexual relationships with individuals of a different gender or the same gender, or even more than one gender. And gender identity refers to persons' deeply felt internal individual experience, which may or may not correspond with the sex assigned at birth. Now, this is very important, the sex assigned at birth. Please remember, because the doctor takes one look at you and says, oh, you're a boy or a girl. It's assigned by the doctor. But we are looking at gender identity where we are saying that our personal sense of the body has to be different from what the medical, surgical, or other means decides what our body is. So, of course, gender identity also looks at expressions of gender, which includes dress, speech, and mannerisms. How one appears physically, dress, hairstyles, accessories, we added mannerisms to that. Speech, behavior patterns, names, personal references, that gender expression may or may not conform to the person's gender identity. So that is also something we need to understand, that the gender identity may be a particular identity that is being presented, and whatever we are presenting ourselves as may not conform to the to a gender identity. Sex characteristics, of course, physical features, including genitalia and other sexual and reproductive anatomy, chromosomes, hormones, secondary physical features. But remember that we on purpose in 2017, when we were working with Yogyakarta +10, we discussed this word intersex and sex characteristics a lot. And we realized that no, using intersex is actually limiting us. We need to use sex characteristics, which the culturally specific identity categories is not something that you get stuck with. You actually build a normative framework around discrimination on a more universal ground. I would invite you to please look up the Yogyakarta principles and the +10. There's a lot of stuff over there. I don't have the time to go through all that now. I just thought I should just do this as an introduction to it. We are using the Yogyakarta principles as a tool of resistance, and which we are setting up a normative architecture around understanding and responding to the violations, fighting with and struggling with governments. So how do we utilize this normative framework as a tool of resistance, such that violence, discrimination, and harm on grounds of Soviesque is stopped both by state and non-state actors? I'd like to acknowledge Arvind Narayan, Pooja Patel, Aarti Pai, and activists from this community who have really helped me understand this issue and also helped me fight back at a very, very personal level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Meena, very much for taking us through all that with both clarity and considerable brevity and efficiency. So do we break up the discussion, or we go through the whole program, Megha, and then we have the discussion? What's the pattern you're following?
Dr. Azra has entered.
Yeah. So should we just proceed to the yeah, and then there'll be a joint discussion on both papers simultaneously. Yeah. So then can we invite Azra and do the introductions, Arundhati?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Meena Shishu, for enlightening us on the issue of LGBTQIA, their plight and pangs hitherto unknown to common people. Through your speech, you have brought to light the need not just to decriminalize, but to humanize their lives by treating them normal. It's time now that we have with us Azra from Pakistan. She has been with us. She wanted to be with us for long, but then she couldn't join our session in time. Even then, we are extremely pleased to have her. A very special thanks to Azra for accepting our invitation at such a short notice. As we spoke to her yesterday, and when she was informed about the inability of the earlier speakers, she cooperated with us and she accepted. So thank you, Azra, and welcome. To introduce Madam Azra Sayyed, besides being a doctorate from Minnesota University, Azra has been a farmers activist and instrumental in organizing and mobilizing rural communities across Pakistan for more than 25 years. She is the executive director of Roots for Equity, an organization that has strongly mobilized farmers to fight for food sovereignty, a key political framework for attaining self-reliance in agriculture, especially for women. I request Azra ma'am to speak on the topic, issue of farmer women in South Asia. Azra ma'am. Ma'am, please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. I could not unmute till now. Thank you very much for inviting me, and it's my pleasure to be here. especially if it's South Asia, and it's we have a topic very dear to my heart, which is women's rights in food and agriculture. So given that we don't have much time, how much time do I have, by the way, Arundhati?
You can have 20 minutes.
Okay, very well.
Am I right?
30 minutes we give to each speaker.
Yes, but as per her schedule, like she will
be there till 5:30.
Okay. Then 30 minutes time is given to every speaker, ma'am.
Okay. Given that I have not really prepared very well for today, I will try to utilize all of my 30 minutes, but let me start, okay?
Yes.
So my input will really focus on rural women, particularly small and landless women farmers and women agriculture workers in South Asia. And to be honest, more on Pakistan. So once we look at the socioeconomic and political factors affecting women, food and agriculture policies in the region are of paramount importance. So most of my talk today will look at the policies that our governments across South Asia are implementing in the agriculture sector, and where is the drive for these policies are coming from. I think India has been a beacon in the past year and a half, especially with respect to farmers' rights and farmers' resistance. And the very resistance that happened in India is a key factor in understanding that agriculture now is really dictated by semi-colonial, semi-feudal tendencies. So let me talk about, first of all, three overarching systems of exploitation and oppression that are faced by women. And most of us know them very well. It's feudalism, it's patriarchy, and then capitalism. Though I think in the era in which we are living now, it would be better to call it imperialism instead of capitalism. To highlight feudal or semi-feudal characteristics of a society, let me share some data from the government of Pakistan. According to the government of Pakistan, the agricultural land distribution in Pakistan is highly skewed, as only 5% of the agriculture households own 64% of farmland. On the other side, over 80% of farmers own less than 5 acres of land, and women's share of ownership of land is less than 2%. I think if we are honest, this is not only typical of Pakistan. Similar data would be coming from India and Bangladesh and Nepal and other South Asian countries. So that is where we see that the power of the feudal landlords has stayed, even though we talked about so-called independence from colonial forces in 1947. In essence, I think it would be more appropriate to say that one form of oppression was taken over by another form of oppression and exploitation. And it was really not independence, it was more just transfer of power from one hand to the other. Now, according to the State of the Food Security and Nutrition in 2021, it has been stated that globally there is a failure to progress towards achieving sustainable development goals that pertain to ensuring access to safe and nutritious food and sufficient food for people all around the year, as well as eradicating all forms of malnutrition. Further, between 720 and 811 million people in the world face hunger in 2020. As many as 161 million people faced hunger in 2019, and nearly 2.37 billion people did not have access to adequate food in 2020. And there is an increase of 320 million people in just 1 year. A majority of the people who face hunger are from Asia, and we all know that most of them are from South Asia. Why? Why, when we have such vast lands, we have such wonderful environmental zones, eco zones for food production, we have produced food abundantly. Pakistan is one of the top milk producers, one of the top livestock producers, cotton, and so on, and so is India. Why are we facing such acute hunger and malnutrition? And I think that is what needs to be really looked at if we want to talk about rights, farmers' rights, especially women's rights. We know that semi-feudal, and as I said, with land in the hands of very few households, very few powerful feudal households, we know that semi-feudal and patriarchal norms have consistently controlled women's economic, social, and political lives. A vast majority of rural communities are basically landless farmers as well as agriculture workers. Mechanization and digital technology has led to extreme loss of livelihood. And it means that rural communities are basically workers or semi-proletariats who go from one work to another based on what is available. I just came back from Punjab 2 days ago, and we find that people are jumping from rice cultivation to cotton picking, from cotton picking to potato harvesting, and so on and so on. Whatever is available in whichever region. In Rahimya Khan in Pakistan, we found that entire bunch of villages, the entire community from those villages migrate to another part about maybe 2 to 3 hours away from where they are living to go for cotton picking. Because there's no cotton in their area, there's only sugarcane. And so we know that it's not only that they migrate from rural to rural areas, they're also constantly fluctuating from rural to urban and urban to rural back. Domestic workers are a key example. In many parts of Pakistan, domestic workers, women domestic workers are actually rural women. Once there is wheat harvesting season, they will leave and go back to their villages, stay there for a month, and do the wheat harvesting so that they can have food security, and then they will come back to the urban areas looking for work once again. Similarly, construction workers, if there is road construction, if there is house building, if there is a bridge construction, farmers, landless farmers and agriculture workers will keep on jumping from one work to another. And that is what is the characteristic of the rural worker at this point. Why is all this happening? So to me, the most critical aspect to understand are the new liberal policy framework that has been dictated in our lives in all the countries of South Asia, be it Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, or others. We know very well the key institutions are the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization, as well as bilateral and multilateral trade agencies, such as the USAID, the IBRD, of course, is multilateral, and there are others. But USAID, OSAID, European Union are the key drivers for looking for neoliberal policies and enforcement of these policies in our countries, which means we have no sovereignty. These policies basically are deregulation, privatization, and trade liberalization. These three are the key that have led to the state of affairs that I've described above with respect to hunger, with respect to joblessness, with respect to extreme loss of livelihood. We need to understand the extremely biased approach of the World Trade Organization and look at some of the basic differences between first and third world country producer, third world agriculture producers. And I'm going into this because the WTO is a key instrument in agriculture. It has a whole realm of instruments. The TRIPS agreement, the agreement on agriculture, the sanitary and phytosanitary measures, the technical barriers to trade, and I can go on. But I would like to focus on the agreements that I just talked about a bit, if I have the time, and to explain how these agreements have really kind of become tentacles that have ripped apart our rural communities. We need to understand the extremely biased approach of the WTO and look at the basic differences between first and third world agriculture producers. According to the US Department of Agriculture, the context of a small farmer in the US from the 1920s, from the 1980s to the 2000 was someone who had at least 250 acres of land, 250 acres of land. In 2015, 90% of the US farmers were small family operations with under $350,000 American dollars in annual gross cash farm income, a measure of revenue that includes sales of crops and livestock, government payments, and other farm-related income. Now, if we compare this to um, Indian farmers having an average landholding of 1 hectare, while the US farmers have an average landholding of 176 hectares. There are 2.1 million farms in the US employing less than 2% of the population, whereas in India, we have 1.3 billion people that depend on agriculture and do so for their livelihood. With the average annual income of per farm household from all sources at less than US 1,000. So you can imagine that in the US, the income is at least $18,000 to $19,000 per annum, whereas for us in Asia, especially in the rural areas, the income is less than $1,000. And I'm sure for Bangladesh, for Pakistan, for many of our countries, if we just look at the landless, it would not even come to that. Further, we know that for us, agriculture is a family, it's a family orientation. It is, according to the Committee on World Food Security, high-level panel of experts, the HLPE, describes small-scale agriculture as practiced by families, including 1 or more households, using only or mostly family labor and deriving from that work a large but variable share of the income in kind or in cash. Agriculture includes crop raising, animal husbandry, forestry, and artisanal fisheries. The holdings are run by family groups, a large portion of which are headed by women, and women play important roles in production, processing, and marketing activities. So I don't think any of us are blind to what family farming is in our parts of the world. We know very well that everybody, a child of 5 years old, also pitches in. If you talk to women in the cotton sector, when we ask them at what age did you start bringing your daughters in, they say as soon as they start working, as soon as they start walking, sorry. And so a 5-year-old kid, 6-year-old kid will go along with the mother and help her in picking cotton. And I think that is also very common for both India and Pakistan. So given this background of the WTO agreements and the IMF World Bank conditionalities, which I did not go into, but the IMF World Bank conditionalities are also hinged on the 3 neoliberal policies of deregulation, privatization, and trade liberalization. I will look into 3 sectors of Pakistan and try to showcase how it has impacted us in our daily lives, especially the landless women of Pakistan. Now, dairy sector is really based on landless families. Most of the livestock is bred by women who have no land, and they end up either leasing land or working on farmland where they can get fodder for their animals. Most of them, almost 100%, if not 80% of them, do not own livestock. They share the livestock with the owner. So they will rear the livestock, and in return, she gets one. If the cow has 2 animals, she gives birth to 2 offspring. One belongs to the caretaker and one belongs to the owner. The milk is kept by the rearing family. So that is the trend. I know for Pakistan, I'm sorry, I cannot say that for India. I don't know what the practices are in India, but for Pakistan across board, this is what is happening. Now, why do women really, really want livestock? Because they do not have land. And livestock increases in quantity. And livestock gives them food on a daily basis, cash income on a daily basis. If they are able to sell the milk, then some amount of milk they keep for their own nutrition, and some amount of milk is sold off as daily income needs of buying just small things like vegetables, or sometimes even atta, like flour. So, and then again, they say, if there is a tragedy, if there is a wedding, if you need to buy dowry for our daughters, that is what we do. We breed animals and we sell them off as time comes by and the need is there. So that is the basic asset of rural families. What the SPS, the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement of the WTO has done. It has stipulated that the dairy sector now cannot sell milk without pasteurization. They have standardized based on international standards of what should be the hygiene control over milk. Now, this is not pertaining to internal consumption of milk. This is only pertaining to trade-related aspects. For example, I will give you the example of the United States. In the 50 states of the US, people can drink raw milk. Every state allows their people to drink raw milk. Whereas now in Pakistan, where 90% of milk production is in the hands of small and landless farmers, they are saying you cannot sell milk unless it is pasteurized. So the this dictate is coming from the need to wrench control of the milk from the small and landless farmers to the big corporations. The corporations like Nestle, recently, about 2 years ago, there was a local company called Engro. It has been now bought by Friesland Campina, a Dutch cooperative, farmers cooperative, and they really just hated that the small farmers have 80% of the milk market. You know, and we all know, especially those of us who come from northern parts of well, I think all over our countries, that milk is not only milk. Milk is used to make butter, milk is used to make ghee, and then lassi. And so these are and during COVID, we went through so many communities, and they were saying the only reason we were able to escape hunger was that we had milk at home. If there was nothing else, we would make a chapati, we would make a roti, and give it to our children with a little bit of a glass of milk or half a glass of milk. There was not abundant food, but there was enough food that they did not go hungry. And so we know very well how critical livelihood is and livestock is, and how critical the dairy products from livestock are to our lives. The corporations now have mandated the World Trade Organization to make international standards of dairy, which is going to be sold in the market. The SPS agreement, the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, has allowed a body called Codex Alimentarius, which sits under the supervision of Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, and the WHO, World Health Organization, and the government of Pakistan has created an authority called the Pure Food Authority, which is now going around the country, destroying these big trucks of carrying milk in these dabbas. I think we all have the same kind of tradition. And they're testing it, doing samples and saying, oh, this is contaminated milk. This is bad milk. You have to throw it away. They literally dump thousands of liters of milk on the ground. And that is such a big criminal activity. In a country, in all our countries, we do not have safe water to drink. Especially the rural communities do not have safe water to drink. How come? How come that a food which is so nourishing, which we are the civilization of Indus Valley civilization, the Harappa civilization, we have had livestock for thousands of years. We have drunk raw milk for thousands of years. How can they suddenly stipulate this on the people in a population which is suffering from hunger and malnutrition, especially women and children? So you see the extreme criminal minds of our governments under semi-colonial, semi-feudal relationships, where they are willing to destroy and take away food, rich food from our hands, just so that the corporations can take control of the livestock sector. At the same time, they're using the TRIPS agreement, the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. The Americans are bringing in cows, big fat cows from their countries, which eat 4 times the amount of food, the amount of fodder which our cows eat, whether it is the Sahiwal guy or the Cholistan guy or the DG Khan guy. And these cows cannot stand the heat of our countries. And hence many of them just die. They just cannot be able to maintain their bodies in the kind of environment, the climatic environment that there is in Pakistan, in our countries. And then at the same time, the Americans are also bringing in semen to for animal husbandry, for artificial insemination of the cows of the Pakistani indigenous varieties. And hence, so when we have these specialty animals, these animals will be under trips like the seeds that we have already lost across our regions, not only in South Asia, but across the world globally under the Green Revolution. Similar patterns of colonialism are being now employed in the livestock sector. And hence, what will happen? That women will not be able to keep animals. Already, the government officers are going around villages and saying, your lanes should look neat and clean. You should not have animals standing outside. What nonsense. In rural communities, where you have not given us any transport, you have not given us electricity, you have not given us water, you have not given us schooling or health systems, you are telling us that we need to keep our lanes neat and clean? What is this? We have no land. Where will we keep our animals if not in the lanes outside our houses? So these are techniques, these are tools of controlling people's livelihood. And that is, there is a lot more information on this. Under the IMF conditionalities, the price of urea, fertilizer, pesticides, seeds has gone sky high. The small farmers just cannot produce anymore. They cannot afford the inputs. And due to Green Revolution, most of our seeds are gone. They don't have seed. They have to buy seed every year. And they cannot buy a 10,000 rupees bag of DAP, which is now critical for all of these hybrid seeds. So on one hand, they cannot produce. The second is they have no land. The third is they are being told that you have to meet with international standards to produce. And in the end, we will not produce anything. I'm just coming out of an FAO regional seminar. That's why I was late. I could not come out. I had to speak there. And there, the Palestinians, the Iraqis, the Lebanese were saying exactly the same thing, that they are not letting us produce. Why are we being fed by American wheat? Why are we being fed by Ukraine wheat, where we can produce wheat ourselves? Only if the IMF and the World Bank would just let us go, pull out their tentacles from our lives and our lands, we would be able to have sane lives. I will now go to cash crops. There's a lot more on milk, but I will just, because I want to really put across three areas. The second area is cash crops in general. I don't know if all of you know this or not, but the United States and the European government have stipulated that they have to have a certain percentage of ethanol in the fuel that they put into their vehicles, in their cars and their luxury cars and whatever they drive. 10%, I think, of ethanol. Where is this ethanol going to come from? Ethanol is produced from maize. It's also produced in some parts of the world from rice and wheat, but maize and sugarcane are two crops that are very, very favorites for producing ethanol. The land under sugarcane is increasing immensely. And we are a country which is scarce in water. With the kind of disputes we have between India and Pakistan, the amount of water which we are getting now is very little. And then with the climate change, the glaciers are melting at a very fast rate. Can we afford to grow a crop such as sugarcane, which guzzles up water? It stands for one whole year. When a sugarcane stands for one whole year, it means that no other crop can be grown. So wheat will not be grown, which is the staple food of our people. If we do not grow wheat, what's going to happen? So wheat is out of the whole system of thinking that we need to be food sufficient. On the other hand, they're increasing more and more and more land to sugarcane. Now they're making the women and the men, the landless, come and work and cut cane and load cane. Cutting cane is without wages. You cut cane and they will give you fodder. So the women, because they are landless and they have animals, they will go and cut cane from early morning, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning till sunset, which is about 6 o'clock nowadays. And it is very, very exhausting work. You know, cane is very hard. And then the supervisors from the feudals are standing on the head saying, cut from the very low of the cane because they don't want it to be wasted. And so there are all kinds of penalties are on these women for not being able to produce accordingly. Hence, vast areas of landless people and agriculture workers are cutting cane across the year. Cane only is cut for 3 months, or actually maybe 2 to 3 months is all that cane is harvested. For the rest of the 9 months, it's just standing there guzzling up water, and there is no labor and there is no food. And hence, this flow of rural women from all these areas into cities like Karachi and Lahore, where they work during the months because they have no work at home and they have no food. And when I ask these domestic workers, why do you leave such beautiful areas and come to Karachi where it is so noisy, it is so, and they live in squatter settlements? They say, at least we get something to eat here. We can take back leftover food from your kitchens to feed our kids. In Muzaffargarh, just 3 days ago, we were in the farmlands and workers were saying, if somebody would give us 1 meal a day, we would just work for that. It's amazing for us in Pakistan to come across that kind of data. It's just amazing. It's unbelievable. And so sugarcane, maize, also same thing, biodiesel. They are now growing a lot of maize because maize is also used as livestock fodder. And they want to feed the fodder maize because then maize gives, you know what, bigger droppings of dung, animal dung. And animal dung is now being recycled as biodiesel. So it's a assembly line product that they have created. By the way, the foreign cattle which is coming from USA does not have animal dung. It just throws out diarrhea-like dung. And women say, we can do nothing with that. And why is animal dung so critical to rural women? Because that is their source of energy. With all this stuff about don't cut wood, don't cut wood, don't cut wood, although we will have really beautiful furniture in our homes of the very rich, not only in the rich parts of the world, but also in Asia, these women who just need wood for energy, it is now really cold weather in Punjab and there was no wood. How do they live through these cold winters when they have no source of warmth in their homes? Secondly, wood is needed to cook food. How else would you cook food? In the forest areas of Pakistan, in the upper hills of Pakistan, they are now literally throwing out people from the forest land saying, these people are cutting up trees. They have lived there for years and years, centuries. They have every right to take wood from those woods, and they don't cut the whole tree. They just take minimal things which they need for their daily use. Not like the timber mafia, which will cut the whole damn tree and it is sold for very big sums in our cities. So it goes on, but I will just stop here with respect to dairy. Cash crop, I really wanted to say that if you are growing strawberry, if you are growing sugarcane, you're growing maize, there is no food. None of this is food. These are all export cash crops or urban elite food crops, delicacies. Who will eat strawberry 3 times a day? I mean, nonsense. Then I come to potato. This we just stumbled upon in the past week. The Pepsi Cola has a number of brand potato chips. One is Lay's, and then they have something called Kurukure or something like that. And they have a number of products which they're all brand potato brands. They have come out with a new policy. I'm forgetting the name now. New agriculture generative policy or something of 2030, where they have said, we will grow potato on 7 million hectares of land in 28 countries. Growing what? Potatoes. For what? Lay's chips. And Lay's chips is extremely dangerous for our kids. It is first of all very expensive, and the children don't understand that it really eats away the household income on all kinds of trash food. Secondly, it means that the kids are eating just carbohydrates with very high salt. If you go to our hospitals across the world, the hospitals are just overflowing with people who are sick. What does that mean? I don't want to get into the COVID debate right now, but where has COVID come from? What is COVID? It really needs to be politicized. That how come that we have to deal with the pandemic, and then the vaccine, the whole TRIPS agenda of not allowing vaccines to be produced in our country. So it's interrelated. I don't want to go into it, but just want to connect the TRIPS agreement to the seeds, to the animals, and then to the health sector. And of course, the rural women are the worst affected because they are very superstitious about getting injection jabs into their arms. There's so much conspiracy going around that every time you go to them and say, please get the jab, they are very afraid. They're very afraid. They don't know what is going to happen to them. With respect to potato, it is only 1 month of work, at the most 40 days of work, and women get less than $2 a day. Now, the problem with potato is once you have potato sown, you cannot have wheat again. So this is the third critical cash crop that is taking away land from wheat. With wheat, as I said before, when women cut wheat, they get paid in kind. So they have food security at home. They will do so much work during the wheat harvesting just to get the wheat stored as grains at home, which they can use gradually over the year. If they get paid in cash, first of all, there's patriarchy. South Asia, one of the most patriarchal regions of the world, the income goes into the hands of the men. Second, with the extreme heightened prices in food, what can they get out of that 400 rupees per day just for 40 days? Nothing. And so within a month and a half, 2 months, 3 months, they have scarce food at home. And what they're doing is, the second issue is TRIPS agreement. The potato seeds are all under intellectual property rights. And so the farmers have no access to the seed. The Pepsi Cola supervisors come, hand them over the seed, make sure they get all the product back to their storehouses, and the farmers are left with no seed. They are not allowed to save the seed. They are not allowed to re-sow the seed. So the farmers just cannot do the potato crop on their own. Secondly, it is such an expensive crop to grow that the small farmers, the 1 acre, 2 acre farmers just cannot do it. Same with sugarcane. The small farmers cannot grow sugarcane. And if you are a sharecropper, which means you are supposed to work on some landlord's land, the amount of money which comes back from sharecropping, because you go and sell the cane to sugar mills, the sugar mills pay in checks. The check comes to the owner of the land, not to the sharecropper. Hence, the sharecropper doesn't ever know how much was he paid. You see, the pattern of destitution just keeps on and on and on. And lastly, I don't know how much time I've got left. I'm very sorry if I've overplayed my time. Lastly, I would like to come to the issue of crisis. Well, maybe first of all, infrastructure. Infrastructure development knows no bound in our countries. Whether it is the Chinese, whether it is the Americans, whoever it is, they all want to lay out big infrastructure projects. Everybody wants to be connected to the port, whether it is the Sri Lankan port, whether it is the Pakistani ports, or the Chabahar, which the Indians were building before the Americans just, told them to get out of Iran. And the ports are all for trade. Now, when you build massive infrastructure roads and networks to connect yourselves to the ports, like the colonial era of India and Pakistan, of the undivided subcontinent, we know very well that these tracks of roads and networks go through people's lands. I will just share with you one example. There's something called the Northern Bypass, which was built in Peshawar. It is partly funded by the Asian Development Bank, and it was meant to give the Americans access to Afghanistan and to Central Asia. And on the other hand, also connect with the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor Infrastructure Program. And there's a community with which a farmers farmers resistance group is working. Those farmers were landless farmers working on a big landlord's land. When the northern bypass was being built, the government of Pakistan paid the landlord for the land that was being utilized in the bridge that was being laid down there. The landless were just told to move themselves. And the landless said, no, we've been here for 150 years. We are part of that land. And we also need either to get land as you got it, or we need to be compensated. Those people, less than a handful of maybe 50 households, constant round of FIRs, like police reports, getting thrown into jail, coming out of jail, going back to jail, coming out of jail. Those people had a lot of livestock. They have sold all their livestock now just so that they can fight the court case. We went and talked to the women there asking, how is it impacting you? They said, we have now no cow dung. We have no animal dung. We don't know how to cook our food. We have no milk. Milk in the market is very expensive. We cannot afford to buy the milk. And we have no livestock with which to get the milk. The men are either working as daily workers elsewhere in the town, or are fighting the case. And this is a story which is repeated across our countries. If we go and work with the people who have been displaced because of the land grabbing that is happening, it is all again tied to international trade. It's not tied to resilient, self-sufficient food production systems in our own countries. I just remembered, and I really want to talk about protracted crisis. What is protracted crisis? It is as it is in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh. These are regions where our governments and international governments have been constantly playing out different kinds of conflicts, making people IDPs, internally displaced persons. Now, what has that to do with food and agriculture? Number one, they do not allow you to grow tall crops like maize, or even maize especially. In the northern areas, the food product of the people there is maize. They eat makai ki roti, as you know. And so with no maize, they really have very meager sources of food, because they can't grow wheat because it's so cold out there. Most of them will then grow wheat, whether it is Kashmir or whether it is northern areas of Pakistan. So one is that they cannot do that. Second, due to curfew, they could not bring out the livestock. They cannot go out to cut fodder for the livestock, and they had to kill their livestock. We visited many communities. They literally had to kill their livestock because they had no food to feed the livestock. And once you have killed that source of income, you cannot actually buy another one. It is very hard to replace a herd again very quickly. It takes time. Of course, it can be done, but it's a very long process. In addition, when women go from one place to another, they migrate, they become refugees. What happens? They are extremely harassed. They're sexually very, very vulnerable. They face violence not only from the male household members themselves, but everybody in the environment. Many of the young girls are immediately married off so that they are not left at home. These are just some of the issues that we have looked at. But to me, another really big issue is of the food aid which is dumped into our areas when there is protracted crisis. They will take away our productive means for growing our own food, number one, and then they will bring in really low quality food aid from their countries, which is actually surplus production, very poor quality surplus production, and they'll dump into our countries. A major problem is therapeutic foods, the micronutrient food supplies. They are genetically produced, and they're also externally mixed into our atta and ghee and so on. 7 corporations control the micronutrient therapeutic foods, micronutrient foods across the world. 7 corporations, 6 of them are Americans, 1 is Swiss, Nestle. What is happening? Even when there is a humanitarian crisis, they only look for opportunities to get into our systems and use that to get hold of our territories, of our people, of our livelihood. So I will just stop there, and finally, I would like to say that the most viable framework to fight against neocolonialism, to fight against this kind of semi-feudalism, is to stand on food sovereignty, which is a set of principles. Number one, that we, the farmers, the producers, have the right to all productive resources, whether it's seed, whether it be forests, whether it be water. And so we, the rural people, will claim our rights to our productive resources. Secondly, it is also based on the principle of right to food. Everybody has the right to adequate, nourishing, culturally appropriate food. We in Pakistan, we either eat rice or wheat or makai. Those are the three staples that we know in Pakistan. Why are we forced to eat noodles? Why are they trying to change our culture from eating whatever we were eating to something else? And that is again very rampant across the regions, not only in South Asia, but across. So right to food, right to land, especially women. Women must have entitlement to lands. And then no to imperialism. We have the right to fight for our lands. We take that right to fight for our rights. That is the slogan that we use across. And I think what is very attractive about food sovereignty is it unites the workers and the farmers and the agri-workers of across the globe. These are similar situations, whether it is India or Pakistan, South Asia, Southeast Asia, the Arab world, the Africans, the Latin Americans, no matter whom. The semi-colonial, the semi-feudal framework under which the Western world is now operating, or the imperialist countries, whether it be Russia or China or the United States or the European countries, that is the framework they are using. They want to take control of various parts of the world and use it as their territory. And that is the resistance that will come. So it's not only agriculture that we're talking about, we're really talking about the sovereignty of the people. And to me, there is nothing more important than to fight for food sovereignty and for our sovereignty of our lands. There are certain recommendations which I just gave to FAO also. I'll just read them out here. Implement food sovereignty framework for sustainable agriculture and sustainable development. Advocate food systems based on self-reliance and prohibit imperialist policies in food and agriculture. Equitable land distribution with emphasis on land entitlements in women's names. Advocate government policies that protect women's right to land and livestock, as well as decent livelihood. Immediate stop to land grabbing and land evictions in our region. Promote and implement agroecology. I did not talk about that much, but agroecology is also a key factor of food sovereignty. Protect and promote indigenous seeds as well as indigenous livestock, and promote food crops instead of cash crops. I end with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Azra, for your elaborate factual account of the farmers' conditions in South Asia and the different problems faced by them and the need of food sovereignty. A very somber account which has come through your experience and knowledge with them of their lives. You have given us an eye-opener to us, especially the very complacent city-living people. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
We are indeed honored to have a veteran historian and a scholar of women's and feminist history writing, Professor Uma Chakravarti, as a chairperson for this session. Rightly called as the founding mother of the women's movement in India, Professor Chakravarti has written books and produced documentary films focusing on many issues, including women's history in India. Her work highlights issues relating to gender, caste, class, as well as on the history of Buddhism and that of ancient and 19th century India. May I now request Professor Chakravarti to present her critical remarks.
Thank you. These are sort of interesting presentations, actually somewhat diverse in terms of the issues that were picked up. And so one will have to actually engage with the presentations in substance, each of them, in order to be able to both summarize and take forward the presentations, but also open it up from the point of view of discussions. To begin with Meena's presentation, Meena Seshu's presentation, it was about a field which is defined in the form of sexual and sexual rights, as well as sex workers, right to life, right to work, and the right to actually express yourself as far as your sexuality is concerned, and in a range of ways. And I think that was interesting, particularly because we skirted around. I think we need to ground it a little bit. Why do we have, and across the world, why did we have such a stigmatized notion, such a narrow notion of sexual activity, and such a stigmatized notion of alternative ways of being, both from the point of view of accepting the range of possibilities as far as desire is concerned, but also from the point of view of institutionally creating mechanisms in which people's desires could be perhaps sorted out. Also, right to work, right to livelihood, and so on came up. Now, I think one of the things we did not acknowledge, and maybe there is no need to do it also because it is understood that this framework is a consequence of the very narrow ways in which human societies have created institutional mechanisms for ensuring that a kind of narrow structure of property relations, as well as a narrow structure in the Indian context of reproducing caste is concerned. So I think that, one of the things that we didn't visibilize, and it's not necessary, but I think it's also important for us to understand where the biases and stigma came from, is the whole dynamics of reproducing the heterosexual family and property systems, which were to go in a particular way around patrilineal. In the Indian context, this is actually South Asian, I would say, across South Asia. It is also tied very strongly to the reproduction, not only of the family and the patriarchal family, but also caste-based society, which requires its own control over mechanisms of structuring reproduction in extremely tight ways, so that actually there are no leakages to the very oppressive structure of social relations that was created. So, in a sense, in India, the heterosexual family also reproduces the caste-based family, because marriages are so tightly arranged. There's very little scope for expressing desire, even within a heterosexual context, outside of the framework of the defined ways in which you look at desire, and the ruling it out of it, and the encouragement of the for expression of desire in very narrow ways. I think it's interesting because the whole discussion around marital rape is actually drawing that out in an interesting way. Why is it that there's so much reluctance to the acknowledgement of marital rape? And at the time when the Verma committee was hearing feminists, following the Nirbhaya case, what was very significant and important is to actually acknowledge the critiques that were coming of institutional ways in which policing was done. But what's interesting is that two things came up. One was the statement that AFSPA should not be override. I don't know, I mean, this is going a little bit off the track, but AFSPA was meant to, it should not be allowed to override sexual violence, because sexual violence cannot be done in the line of duty, whereas other things were okay. Now, what is interesting is that that was an argument we all presented, but the other argument was that we wanted marital rape to go. So in a sense, the feminists were united in asking for specific forms of reform and transformation in society. Apart from the fact that, questions of desire and LGBT communities, and decriminalizing the manner in which people's sexuality was being controlled within a traditional framework of sexual social relations. Let's put it like that. Now, at that stage, what was significant is that many army generals actually brought the two together and argued against the fact that marital rape should not be legislated out. And similarly, the AFSPA should not be picked up. So in a sense, the nation and its sacrosanctness, and the family and its sacrosanctness was being brought together in a very interesting way, of course, throwing out the rights of women to their own bodily autonomy and the choices that they would make. So I think the underpinning of our societies, and however much they transform, however much they apparently look as though they're changing, the structure of social relations doesn't go away at all. It has been sustained and maintained in precisely those ways. So it actually means that every category of people which is seeking to have a less oppressive society in terms of expressing your own desires and also living your life and also having livelihood and also having, a whole range of things was never addressed. So I think that's one of the things. I'll come to the pandemic after in a bit. I think Azra's presentation, which was pitched at very clearly the situation in Pakistan, but will apply to quite a lot of South Asia, and the social framework that she used in terms of, neo-feudalism, patriarchy, and imperialism is the three factors that she brought together. Although she specifically talked of this in the context of whether it's milk, the milk cattle, it is land holding, it is international forces in terms of the cropping patterns and the pressures that are coming from the first world to transform our societies along the lines of an imperialist chain of food production. It also applies to India. What was interesting, I think, for us to notice is that in India, the farmers' movement, when it pitched its argument against formally they took on this position of the fact that the laws were not acceptable because they hadn't been properly discussed. And they used that formal argument, that is rushed through parliament, that they were not consulted, that they are a critical component in the discussions around food production and food marketing and food management of food distribution. So there was a clarity as far as they were concerned in what was wrong in what they were doing. But what was also very interesting was that they constantly brought up what has already happened in America as a reason for saying we don't want to go in that direction. And we know exactly what the consequences of all of this is as far as we are concerned. So whether it is the potato and the potato farms coming in and so on. I mean, the pitch was against multinationals coming into agriculture and then taking over things. Now, whether it is creating mechanisms for stocking the grain, which, by the way, is already gone into the hands of the Adanis. I mean, there are these huge things that have been constructed across the countryside. So, in a sense, the crisis of the farmers and the crisis of food production and the crisis of the living conditions of the Punjab. And if you look at the case study of Punjab, it's so serious. I mean, whether it's on the one hand, it is the fertilizers leading to cancer. Punjab is known as the place where there are cancer specials that travel from one place to another. I mean, that our societies and our economies are in a mess. And this mess is coming from the, forces, both domestic and international, in colluding to create systems of a very repressive kind, in which the burden of this mismanaged and exploitative situation falls upon certain people. Now, the tragedy in all of this is that these are questions we aren't even able to now discuss, because the politics of the South Asia has gone in the direction of actually, again, falling into global rhetoric, Islamophobia, things of various kinds, which actually will stop us from. So who's interested now in the food question? Who's interested? And look at our newspapers. I don't think we are having any discussions on land, any discussions on the right of women to owning property. We are having no discussions on anything substantial, because all our discussions are now pitched at the managing the social and political crisis that we have taken upon ourselves. So in a sense, the older agenda of building a society which is going to be actually a post-colonial society, which will actually transform social relations, has been dumped in the ocean, So on the one hand, we have patriarchy, sexual expression, desire, right to basically be who you are. Those questions which are important, and they've surfaced from time to time, and then they disappear because we don't actually execute. We don't really address the deep structures that have created that scenario. And on the other hand, there is this crisis in the economy and the crisis in livelihood and in people's lives, and we are not addressing that either. So we are, in some ways, we have been diverted. So whether it is because of neo-imperialism, whether it is because of whatever it is, the point is that there is a collusion really between development policies, definitely market forces, and patriarchy. There's no doubt about it. I'll just end with a little example that I gave. We at one point at a South Asian seminar, a South Asian workshop we were having in Nepal, and lots of people from all the South Asian countries were present. Suddenly we decided that we'd draw a map of the South Asia, which was an imaginary map, which was going to, get rid of all the boundaries and create bridges instead of us saying, shall we go to pilgrimages or not, open up our borders, do all of that stuff. But we said, how will we do this? And then economies also deal with the economic situation. We said, how will we do all of that? First, we'll have to start by dumping patriarchy, because patriarchy and militarism has created a certain kind of society. First, you get rid of patriarchy. And then we said, but we'll not be allowed to have this imaginary world because there is the WTO and the imperial forces. So we said, okay, then we have to create WTO and IMF and dump them on the other sea. And that's the only way we'll be able to create another society. So I'm describing this mad experiment on the part of feminists, but it was really trying to imagine another world. But how do you imagine another world with the way in which we are functioning? Even our imagination cannot now go anywhere because it's being so structured by the level of rhetoric and control that has been established on us. I think that's all I'd like to say at the moment from the point of view of opening this discussion. People will certainly have specific questions, and let's have them.
If anyone has questions, please feel free. Megha?
I just see a comment from Vinaya, but there are no questions.
Yes.
And I think if we don't have any questions, it's only telling us that the situation that we are in is so complex and so difficult that we don't even know what questions to ask anymore.
That's true.
Or maybe, ma'am, there are so many questions.
Yeah.
Or there are so many questions, and we are literally dumbfounded. We are literally dumbfounded when we listen to Azra ma'am, and when she's telling the story of Pakistan, and actually it is voicing the story of entire of the South Asia. And we never felt that she's from Pakistan. She's telling us the things about India. And sadly, as I said, that since we are living in we means specifically addressing to the community we are living in as urban people who are not aware of the plight of the farmers, or even for that matter, Meena madam has raised the issue of LGBTQ and everything. The things are around us, but we are not able to because we are not into it. And probably that has left us rather, when listening to all these stories of the plight, that left us literally dumbfounded. So maybe that is the reason.
No, it's there. But if you look at it from the point of view of what we've experienced in the last 2 years with the pandemic and the crisis of the pandemic, you can see that all of this is tied together. I mean, livelihoods were lost. People could not, there were, we had set up something with young students to ask them about how they were responding. One of the things that they came up with is the crisis from the point of view of sex work. What do you do? What is the professionally and otherwise? It was an unimaginable scenario that you are going to have years and years of no free movement and no free. And then we also know how, as far as the people were concerned, and the flight of the labor that tried desperately to go back. I mean, why did the labor have to return? Because if they were supposed to be in the place where they were working, and the food should have been provided to them there, but there was no housing, there was no food. And so people are, you look at the gender dimensions and the human crisis, you're carrying your mother on your back and you're trying to travel long distances. Look at, and then the village and the farm, or in some way, where there would be perhaps some kind of food, is the reason why you're all fleeing over there. So if you look at it from the point of view of what we've been through, you can actually see that the crisis is so deep and so intense that, it requires real serious, thinking and revamping the whole system. But, are we going to do it? Because we are trapped in narrow ways in which we express. I think Meena wants to say something, no?
Yeah, Uma, I'm just saying that, hi, by the way. Okay, I'm just saying that, there are communities that are totally ignored. And they are just not even part of our discussions. Yes. And I think that is what I'd like to bring to the table. The fact that somehow, even talking about, I remember in another meeting where I was, there were people who are from the farmers movement, from the left movement, from progressive movements. And they really felt that LGBTQI issues or even the issues of sex workers was actually not kosher. Right? And we have been pushed into, as it is, sex workers and these communities live on the margins, and they're pushed onto the margins by intellectuals, thinkers, progressives, feminists, even further. And I would like to bring that to the table, because it is so difficult to conceptualize what is happening in the lives of these people, because they don't matter. They don't matter to the state. They don't matter to society. And they're not mattering to us as intellectuals either. And therefore, I'm very disappointed by the fact that, we are just not able to be inclusive of these communities and the sufferings that they, go through. Even if you're looking at sex workers, even if you're looking at the fact that lockdowns just, really, they were committing suicide, they were falling ill. I don't know how they got saved from COVID, but a large group of them across at least the National Network of Sex Workers, we work in 8 states. We've not had huge impact of COVID in terms of death. But the truth is that suicides and lack of food, poverty, and pushed beyond the limits of poverty. And why are they not so important to all of us in our analysis? Why is it that this community refuses to get visibilized by state and society, when both state and society criminalizes them so much? So I just feel that these are important issues also and really need our attention.
The difficulty, I think, is that we function either within a human rights framework or you function within a sort of social relations framework, which is very narrowly defined as production relations. Okay, so at the end of the day, the left is stuck with primary and secondary contradictions, and they don't know how to handle anything else. Even to think about why is desire so policed, so strongly policed, and what is the danger coming from there is something. It's like if you're thinking of primary and secondary, you will never come to the thinking about those issues. It'll always be regarded as stigmatized and lower.
I think lower. Stigmatized, it's lower. Yeah. It's not important enough.
No, it's stigmatized and lower.
And lower.
Both and lower. But on the other hand, at the same time, there will be this this inability also to be creative in thinking about. We are not even talking about, and the human rights framework is fine, but it can't only be the human rights framework.
It can't.
It has to be much more than that. It has to
absolutely.
And equally, the question of livelihood, food, shelter, clothing, those issues which were supposed to be the critical issues when we became an independent state. What has happened to them? They have just completely dropped out from the framework completely. So we are, in a sense, each one is speaking in a little box. And how do we see ourselves as a society? What do we see for ourselves as what does freedom mean? What is what? These are questions that we are not addressing at all. So, yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. With your lively participation, the discussion would seem endless, and we would go on and on.
No, I'm sure you have another session. You have another session?
We do have, but I feel that now the torchbearers like you, it would be the responsibility of my generation and the younger generation to me, who will have to carry forward all these things and give a little space to these issues. I thank you, ma'am, Professor Chakravarti, for your critical review of the presentations by Meena and Azra, ma'am, and commenting critically on the crisis. I would say the crisis of the new rhetoric that the present post-colonial society is facing. And I would frame that the crisis is that of being unquestioning or rather not addressing any of the issues lying ahead. So let us hope that we will be thinking about it and improving the conditions. I take this opportunity to thank you, ma'am, for your enlightened critical review, and all the resource persons of today's sessions on gender in Asia for the remarkable contribution to this symposium. I also thank the audience for the virtual presence. With this, we come to an end to this session on gender in South Asia, and we will very shortly begin with the paper presentation session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.